But by Hippolyte's time they had shifted their focus south to the slave coast. From 1,200 a year in the 1640s, exports of the region of Allada shot up to 10,000 a year in the 1690s, and to more than 15,000 a year in the 1700s and 1710s. This increase was made possible by the unstable political context along the slave coast, and ultimately by the willingness of local officials, like Hippolyte's father, to sell their enemies to European traders. At once predator and prey, the Alladas fought the vassal state of Ouida to the south, and then the expanding kingdoms of Akwamu, Dahomey, and Oyo to the west, north, and east. The wars reached their tragic climax in 1724 to 1726, when King Agaja of Dahomey conquered Allada. The Dahomey king's pacification of Allada and its successor states, and then his further expansion to Ouida and the coast, lasted until 1740, at which point Agaja died and his people became embroiled in a succession war of their own. These troubled times provided plenty of opportunities to raid and kidnap and sell. From the 1720s to the 1740s, Dahomey alone exported 6,000 slaves a year, most of them captured in and around the old Allada kingdom. Louverture's father, Hippolyte, made prisoner and sold when his great tribe was incorporated into the kingdom of Dahomey, was among the casualties of Dahomeyan imperialism. So was his first wife. Their children were apparently deported alongside their parents as well. Slaves who had been purchased or captured in the interior of Allada were usually taken to the slave emporium of Glehu near the coast, where they awaited their fate in a dreadful stockade. This must have been a traumatic experience for Hippolyte, who could legitimately fear the worst for himself and his family. Slaves who attracted no buyers could be killed outright. His only hope was to be ransomed by relatives or sold locally, so that he could at least remain in his homeland. Both of those options eluded him, however, and in or around 1740, Hippolyte and his family were sold to French slave traders. A family tradition specifies that it was an Arab merchant who arranged the sale, which is possible, as some Arab merchants were active in Glehu. The main currency in Western Africa was the cowrie, a type of seashell from the Maldives. Hippolyte's life was worth 300 pounds of those. Because Glehu is located 3 miles inland, Hippolyte and his family were then taken across a lagoon to a sandbar, where they were stripped of their clothes, branded, and handed over to their European buyers. Louverture's father, whose tattoos and scarifications were a sign of pride because they indicated his rank as an Allada aristocrat, now bore a shameful mark of his servile status on his burning skin. So did his wife and crying children. They were led onto a shallop, which battled the frightful surf all the way to a European ship waiting offshore. In time, this ship would ferry the hapless family to some unknown destination. It probably took several months for the ship to fill up with enough captives to make the trip. Meanwhile, the white sailors, who had no immunity against African fevers, would have fretted about the delays. But the delays gave Hippolyte some time to familiarize himself with the floating prison that had become his home. Women and children were probably few on his ship, because 2/3 of all the slaves bought by French slavers were adult men, and probably more so in a war zone like the Slave Coast. French slaving records rarely mention the names of individual slaves, so we cannot know definitively on which ship Hippolyte and his family embarked. But the ship was probably outfitted in Nantes, which was the main slave-trading port in France, or Le Havre, where the French planters who eventually bought Louverture's father had a business partner. The ship that best fits the timeline is the Hermione, a slave trader that visited the Slave Coast in the fall of 1739 and left the island of Principe, just off the African continent, on May 7, 1740, with a cargo of 260 souls. 2 generations before the Haitian Revolution, resistance was already the order of the day. No fewer than 37 crewmen were on the Hermione to guard against a slave revolt, a distinct possibility, since revolts broke out on 150 of the 3,300 slaving expeditions launched from France. Despite such tight security, 2 men and 3 women managed to throw themselves overboard and drown.